The colony that vanished. August 1590. After 3 long years of sailing, waiting, and failed attempts to return due to the war with Spain, an English ship finally approached the coast of Roanoke Island. On the deck stood a man who barely took his eyes off the shore. His name was John White. 3 years ago, he had left his daughter, his son-in-law, his little granddaughter, and over 100 other colonists here. He promised that he would return soon with food supplies, new tools, and everything necessary for life. He sincerely believed that the separation would last only a few months. But history decided otherwise. While White was trying to find a ship to return, England faced the threat of an invasion by the Spanish Armada. All large vessels were mobilized to defend the country. The colony on the distant Atlantic coast ceased to be a priority. Months passed, then years. And all this time, the people on Roanoke were left on their own. When the boat touched the shore, John White expected to see familiar faces. Perhaps children running out to meet him, smoke from kitchen fires, the noise of a small settlement that, despite all the difficulties, had managed to survive. But the shore met him with an unusual silence. Not a single voice, not a single movement. Only the wind slowly swayed the tops of the pines. The colonists seemed to have simply vanished. The houses stood empty. Some structures were neatly dismantled. The fence that once surrounded the settlement no longer existed. There were no signs of a hasty escape. There were no signs of a great battle. There were no bodies. There were no graves. There were not even any weapon fragments. It seemed as if all the inhabitants of the colony had simply packed their things and left one day. But where to? While inspecting the settlement, the sailors found only one clue. On a wooden post, a word was neatly carved. CROATOAN. On a nearby tree, only 4 letters were carved. Crow. Before sailing, John White had an agreement with the colonists. If they had to leave the settlement voluntarily, they would carve the name of the place where they were moving. If they were forced to leave the colony by force or were in mortal danger, they would leave a cross next to the inscription. There was no cross. This meant only one thing. At least at the time of their departure, the colonists did not believe they were leaving the settlement under duress. But this raised even more questions. Why did they leave Roanoke? Why didn't they leave a letter? Why didn't they wait for the governor's return? And most importantly, what happened to the 117 people, including women and small children? More than 400 years have passed. Historians, archaeologists, and researchers have put forward dozens of theories. Some believe that the colonists peacefully joined local tribes. Others are convinced that they died of starvation. There are also those who seek the answer in ancient maps, archaeological finds, and even modern DNA studies. But there is still no definitive answer. This is a story not just about a lost colony. It is a story about hope, fear, survival, and one of the greatest mysteries in the history of North America. Today we will travel to the 16th century to trace, step by step, the path of the people who left England for a new life. And perhaps, at the end of this journey, we will get closer to answering the question that has troubled the world for over 4 centuries. What really happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? England dreams of the New World. To understand the mystery of Roanoke, one must first understand the world in which it was born. For this, we must travel back almost 4 centuries. The calendar shows the middle of the 16th century. Europe is experiencing one of the greatest eras of change in its history. The great geographical discoveries are literally redrawing the map of the world. Until quite recently, most Europeans knew about the lands across the Atlantic Ocean only from rumors and legends. And now, ships arrive at ports every year, loaded with gold, silver, exotic goods, and amazing stories about new continents. The biggest winner in this race was Spain. After Christopher Columbus's voyage in 1492, Spanish expeditions discovered new territories one after another. Conquistadors conquered the powerful Aztec and Inca empires. Gold and silver flowed in a continuous stream from the mines of America to Europe. The Spanish Empire was rapidly becoming wealthy. Its military fleet was considered one of the strongest in the world. For many contemporaries, it was Spain that looked like the nation to which the future belonged. But across the English Channel, another country was watching closely: England. In the second half of the 16th century, it was ruled by Queen Elizabeth I. Her reign would go down in history as the Elizabethan era, a time of development for science, navigation, trade, and English culture. But behind the brilliance of the royal court, an important question was hidden. Could England remain a great power if it allowed Spain to solely control the New World? The answer was increasingly the same. No. If England wants to compete with the most powerful countries in Europe, it must also build its own colonies. Not just for the sake of prestige. Colonies could provide new trade routes, natural resources, military bases, and the opportunity to expand the influence of the English crown far beyond Europe. But there was a problem. Unlike Spain, England had almost no experience in establishing overseas settlements. A person willing to take a risk was needed. A person who would believe in this idea so strongly that they would invest their own money, reputation, and even their future. Such a person was Sir Walter Raleigh. Today his name is often mentioned alongside the history of Roanoke. But during his lifetime, he was a much greater figure. Walter Raleigh was a courtier, writer, soldier, politician, explorer, and entrepreneur. He possessed a rare talent for persuading people. It was Raleigh who convinced the Queen to support an ambitious plan to establish an English colony on the coast of North America. For him, it was not just an adventure. He saw the future. He imagined cities that would one day grow among the endless forests, ports where English ships would arrive, farms that would provide the colonies with food, and a new English civilization on the other side of the Atlantic. In 1584, Raleigh equipped the first reconnaissance expedition. 2 small ships set off across the ocean. The journey lasted several months. For sailors of that time, the Atlantic remained a dangerous place. Storms could smash a ship against the waves. A shortage of fresh water became a serious problem. Diseases spread quickly among the crew. However, the expedition successfully reached the coast of modern-day North Carolina. A completely different world opened up before the English. Endless pine forests, wide bays, sandy islands that separated the ocean from calm inland waters, rivers full of fish, a huge number of wild animals. The air was filled with the scent of pine and sea salt. The explorers were captivated. In their reports, they described this land almost as a paradise. Fertile lands, mild climate, natural harbors. It seemed that it was here that England could take its first step toward creating an empire. In honor of Elizabeth I, who was called the Virgin Queen, the new lands were named Virginia. At that time, no one even suspected that this picturesque coastline would soon become the site of one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in history. Another expedition lay ahead. This time, the English were no longer just going to explore the coast. They wanted to stay here forever. And it was this decision that would change the fate of dozens of people and leave a question that the world would seek an answer to for over 400 years. The first attempt at colonization. In 1585, England took a step that was to change its place in history forever. After a successful reconnaissance expedition, Sir Walter Raleigh received permission to continue the colonization of the new lands. This time, the ships were not just setting out to explore the coast. They were to establish the first English settlement in North America. Command of the expedition was entrusted to Sir Richard Grenville, and the experienced military man Ralph Lane became the governor of the future colony. The expedition consisted of over 100 men. Among them were soldiers, carpenters, blacksmiths, sailors, engineers, and craftsmen. Almost all of them were men. No one was yet thinking about creating a full-fledged city. The main task was to establish a foothold on the coast, build fortifications, and assess whether England could maintain a colony so far from home. After several months of sailing, the ships reached the familiar coast. Before them once again opened long strips of sandy islands, dense forests, and calm lagoons. Roanoke Island was chosen as the site for the future settlement. At first glance, this decision seemed quite logical. The island was separated from the open ocean by a narrow strip of sandy islands. It had natural protection from large waves. Nearby were forests rich in timber, and the bays seemed ideal for fishing. But the colonists did not yet know that serious dangers were hidden behind this beauty. The sandbars often changed their location. Even experienced captains could run a ship aground. The weather near the Atlantic coast changed extremely quickly. One strong storm could cut the colony off from the outside world for long months. The first weeks passed quite successfully. The colonists began to build wooden fortifications. They set up guard posts. They arranged warehouses. Every day, small groups set out to explore the surrounding forests and rivers. It was then that the English first got to know the peoples who had lived on these lands long before their arrival. The coast was inhabited by dozens of tribes of the Algonquian language group. They had their own traditions, customs, political alliances, and long-standing disputes among themselves. One of the most influential was Chief Wingina. It was his people who first met the English. At first, everything was surprisingly peaceful. The indigenous people brought fish. They showed where to catch crabs and oysters. They taught the English how to grow corn in the local climate. They explained which plants were edible and which should be avoided. Without this help, the colonists would hardly have survived even the first season. One of the most important figures of this period was Manteo. He was a representative of the CROATOAN tribe and quickly established friendly relations with the English. Manteo repeatedly acted as an interpreter and mediator between the two worlds. It was thanks to him that many conflicts were avoided. But alongside Manteo was another man. His name was Wanchese. Initially, he also visited England together with the English sailors. But after his return, his attitude changed sharply. Wanchese began to convince other tribes that the newcomers posed a serious threat, and time showed that his fears were not unfounded. Months passed. Food supplies were dwindling. The colonists became increasingly dependent on the help of local tribes. But every time the English asked for food, they demanded more and more. What initially resembled trade gradually turned into pressure. Distrust began to grow on both sides. Some English officers were convinced that a show of force would make the locals more compliant. This turned out to be a fatal mistake. In the spring of 1586, the conflict reached a critical point. The English suspected Chief Wingina of preparing an attack. Without waiting for confirmation, they decided to strike first. During a surprise raid, British soldiers attacked the settlement. In the skirmish, Wingina was killed. To the English, this seemed like a military victory. For the local tribes, it was a betrayal that destroyed any remaining trust. It was after this that most of the coastal peoples began to perceive the colonists not as guests, but as invaders. Soon, the situation of the colony became critical. There was almost no food left. Help from England did not arrive. Diseases were becoming more frequent. People were losing faith in success. And it was then that an English fleet unexpectedly appeared off the coast. It was led by one of the most famous navigators of his time, Sir Francis Drake. He had just completed a successful campaign against the Spanish in the Caribbean. Seeing the state the colony was in, Drake offered the colonists a return home. For many, it was not an easy decision. They dreamed of becoming the first English settlers of the New World. But reality turned out to be much harsher. In June 1586, most of the colonists left Roanoke and set sail back to England. The first English attempt to establish a permanent colony ended in failure. It seemed that Walter Raleigh's project had collapsed, but Raleigh himself thought otherwise. He carefully studied all the mistakes of the first expedition. In his opinion, the problem was not just the lack of food or conflicts with local tribes. The real reason was different. It is impossible to create a new country if only soldiers go there. Families were needed. Women were needed. Children were needed. People were needed who would come not to fight, but to live. It was then that the plan for a new expedition was born. An expedition that would go down in history as the Lost Colony of Roanoke. And none of those who prepared for the voyage in 1587 even suspected that their names would survive for centuries, not because of their achievements, but because of the mystery they would leave behind. Colony of Hope. After the failure of the first expedition, many in England believed that Walter Raleigh's project was doomed. Critics openly said that attempts to create a colony on the other side of the Atlantic were just a waste of money. They reminded everyone of the dead, of the diseases, of the hunger, of the conflicts with local tribes, and of the fact that the first colony never managed to establish itself in the new land. But Walter Raleigh refused to admit defeat. He was convinced that the problem was not in the idea of colonization itself. The mistake was that the first expedition consisted mainly of military personnel. Soldiers knew how to build fortifications. They knew how to fight, but they could not create a real community. The new settlement was to be a home, not a fortress. That is why it was decided to form the new expedition quite differently. Ordinary families were to set off for America. Farmers, carpenters, blacksmiths, masons, women, children, people who intended to stay there forever. In the spring of 1587, preparations for the voyage were completed. 3 ships set sail. There were 117 colonists on board. John White led the expedition. Unlike many military commanders of his time, he was not just a governor. White was an artist, a cartographer, an explorer. His watercolor paintings of the indigenous peoples of North America are today considered priceless historical documents. He observed people carefully, remembered details, and understood that the colony would not survive without cooperation with local tribes. His daughter Eleanor Dare was on the ship with him, her husband Ananias, and many other families. They were not looking for adventure. They were leaving England forever. In the holds of the ships lay wheat seeds, tools, agricultural implements, clothing, dishes, books, household items, everything that might be needed to start a new life. After several months of sailing, the ships finally reached the coast of North America. But almost immediately, an unexpected problem arose. Initially, the colony was not planned to be founded on Roanoke Island. The new location was supposed to be the Chesapeake Bay area, which was considered more suitable for life. However, the expedition captain Simon Fernandez unexpectedly refused to take the ships further. The reasons for his decision remain a subject of debate even today. Some historians believe he was in a hurry to set off on a privateering expedition against Spanish ships. Others suggest he feared the difficult navigation near the coast. One way or another, the colonists were landed on Roanoke, where a previous expedition had already failed once. For many, this became an alarming sign. When the settlers arrived at the remains of the old colony, they saw an almost abandoned place. The buildings that were still standing were damaged. The wood began to rot. The fortifications needed repairs. Some structures were destroyed by storms. Others were gradually reclaimed by nature. The colonists had to start almost from scratch. Every day, they worked from dawn until sunset. Some chopped down trees. Others built new houses. Someone repaired the boats. Someone cleared the land for future fields. There was so much work that there was almost no time for rest. Despite the difficulties, life was gradually improving. And then an event occurred that gave people new hope. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter. The girl was named Virginia. Virginia Dare became the first English child born in the territory of the future United States. For the entire colony, it was more than just the birth of a child. It was a symbol, proof that a new life had already begun. The colonists celebrated. Some said it was a good sign, that the child would grow up not in England, but in a new English world. But outside the settlement, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. After the events of the first expedition, many tribes no longer trusted the English. Manteo, who remained an ally of the colonists, tried to convince other chiefs to support the newcomers. Sometimes it worked, but far from always. The biggest problem was food again. The crops had not yet yielded a harvest. Hunting was unpredictable. Fishing depended on the weather. Supplies brought from England were rapidly dwindling. It was obvious that without new help, the colony might not survive the next year. The colonists increasingly asked Governor John White to return to England. At first, he categorically refused. White did not want to leave his daughter. He did not want to leave his newborn granddaughter. And he understood perfectly well that the ocean could separate them for a long time. Colony of Hope. After the failure of the first expedition, many in England believed that Walter Raleigh's project was doomed. Critics openly said that attempts to create a colony on the other side of the Atlantic were just a waste of money. They reminded everyone of the dead, of the diseases, of the hunger, of the conflicts with local tribes, and of the fact that the first colony never managed to establish itself in the new land. But Walter Raleigh refused to admit defeat. He was convinced that the problem was not in the idea of colonization itself. The mistake was that the first expedition consisted mainly of military personnel. Soldiers knew how to build fortifications. They knew how to fight, but they could not create a real community. The new settlement was to be a home, not a fortress. That is why it was decided to form the new expedition quite differently. Ordinary families were to set off for America. Farmers, carpenters, blacksmiths, masons, women, children, people who intended to stay there forever. In the spring of 1587, preparations for the voyage were completed. 3 ships set sail. There were 117 colonists on board. John White led the expedition. Unlike many military commanders of his time, he was not just a governor. White was an artist, a cartographer, an explorer. His watercolor paintings of the indigenous peoples of North America are today considered priceless historical documents. He observed people carefully, remembered details, and understood that the colony would not survive without cooperation with local tribes. His daughter Eleanor Dare was on the ship with him, her husband Ananias, and many other families. They were not looking for adventure. They were leaving England forever. In the holds of the ships lay wheat seeds, tools, agricultural implements, clothing, dishes, books, household items, everything that might be needed to start a new life. After several months of sailing, the ships finally reached the coast of North America. But almost immediately, an unexpected problem arose. Initially, the colony was not planned to be founded on Roanoke Island. The new location was supposed to be the Chesapeake Bay area, which was considered more suitable for life. However, the expedition captain Simon Fernandez unexpectedly refused to take the ships further. The reasons for his decision remain a subject of debate even today. Some historians believe he was in a hurry to set off on a privateering expedition against Spanish ships. Others suggest he feared the difficult navigation near the coast. One way or another, the colonists were landed on Roanoke, where a previous expedition had already failed once. For many, this became an alarming sign. When the settlers arrived at the remains of the old colony, they saw an almost abandoned place. The buildings that were still standing were damaged. The wood began to rot. The fortifications needed repairs. Some structures were destroyed by storms. Others were gradually reclaimed by nature. The colonists had to start almost from scratch. Every day, they worked from dawn until sunset. Some chopped down trees. Others built new houses. Someone repaired the boats. Someone cleared the land for future fields. There was so much work that there was almost no time for rest. Despite the difficulties, life was gradually improving. And then an event occurred that gave people new hope. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter. The girl was named Virginia. Virginia Dare became the first English child born in the territory of the future United States. For the entire colony, it was more than just the birth of a child. It was a symbol, proof that a new life had already begun. The colonists celebrated. Some said it was a good sign, that the child would grow up not in England, but in a new English world. But outside the settlement, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. After the events of the first expedition, many tribes no longer trusted the English. Manteo, who remained an ally of the colonists, tried to convince other chiefs to support the newcomers. Sometimes it worked, but far from always. The biggest problem was food again. The crops had not yet yielded a harvest. Hunting was unpredictable. Fishing depended on the weather. Supplies brought from England were rapidly dwindling. It was obvious that without new help, the colony might not survive the next year. The colonists increasingly asked Governor John White to return to England. At first, he categorically refused. White did not want to leave his daughter. He did not want to leave his newborn granddaughter. And he understood perfectly well that the ocean could separate them for a long time. When the colony disappeared, when John White left Roanoke in 1587, he was sure he would return the following year. It seemed that nothing could prevent this journey. He only needed to reach England, get new supplies, find a ship, and cross the Atlantic Ocean again. But almost immediately after his arrival, it became clear that all plans would have to be postponed. Europe was on the brink of a great war. The Spanish King Philip II was finishing preparations for a large-scale invasion of England. Hundreds of ships were gathering into a single fleet, which would go down in history as the Invincible Armada. Queen Elizabeth I ordered the mobilization of almost all suitable vessels. Every ship was needed for the defense of the country. The colony on the distant coast of America suddenly became a secondary matter. John White appealed to officials. He wrote letters. He asked for permission to outfit at least one ship. But the answer remained the same. First, England must be saved. Only then can one think about the colonies. In 1588, the English fleet won one of the most important victories in its history. The Invincible Armada was defeated. This victory opened the way for England to future maritime power. However, for the people on Roanoke, almost nothing changed. 1 year passed, then a second, then a third. All this time, the colonists were left on their own. We do not know exactly what happened during those years. Not a single diary has been preserved, not a single letter, not a single eyewitness account. That is why historians call this period the 3 silent years. But some things can be assumed. The food supplies brought from England had long since run out. Clothing was gradually wearing out. Tools were breaking. Wooden houses were in need of repair. The The children were growing up. New babies could be born far from any civilization. To survive, the colonists had to either learn to depend entirely on nature or find support among local tribes. There was almost no other choice. Finally, in August 1590, John White managed to return. The journey was difficult. The ship encountered storms several times. Strong winds hindered the landing. But when the shore was finally very close, White could not hide his excitement. His family remained here. His daughter, his little granddaughter, who by now should have been 3 years old. He imagined how she would run to meet him, how the colonists would greet the ship with joyful shouts, how all the hardships would be left behind. But this did not happen. When the sailors stepped ashore, they were met only by silence. Unusual, almost eerie. The settlement was empty. Not a single person. No smoke over the houses. Not a single sound. White quickly began to inspect the colony. The houses remained in their places, but many of them had been neatly dismantled. The boards were gone, as if they had been intentionally used for construction elsewhere. The fence that once protected the settlement had also been dismantled. It was strange. If the colony had been captured by enemies, it is unlikely they would have so carefully dismantled the wooden structures. Even more strange was the absence of any signs of violence. There were no bodies. There were no bones. There were no graves. There were no remains of burned houses. There were not even any abandoned weapons. It seemed as if the people had simply packed their things one day and quietly left the settlement. Then one of the sailors noticed a carved inscription. On a wooden post, it was written in large letters. CROATOAN. A little further on a tree, only the first 3 letters remained. Crow. John White immediately remembered the agreement. That was how the colonists were to signal where they had relocated. He carefully examined the inscription. There was no cross nearby, and that meant a very important thing. At least when the people left Roanoke, they did not believe they were doing so under duress. At first glance, everything looked quite simple. The colonists had moved to CROATOAN Island, where the friendly Manteo tribe lived. All that remained was to sail there. But at that very moment, history took another unexpected turn. The sky darkened quickly. A strong storm was approaching from the ocean. The ship's captain categorically refused to risk the vessel. He stated that further sailing could end in disaster. John White begged him to continue the search. He was ready to set out even in a small boat. After all, perhaps a few dozen kilometers away, his daughter and granddaughter were waiting for him. But the decision had already been made. The ship turned around and began to move away from the shores of Roanoke. John White watched the coastline for a long time as it slowly disappeared over the horizon. He would never return to America again, and he would never know what happened to his family. Along with the ship, the last opportunity to find witnesses to these events was sailing away. More than 400 years have passed since then. The mystery of the lost colony only grew deeper, because now historians had only one word: CROATOAN, and dozens of questions to which no one could give a definitive answer. All theories. What really happened to the lost colony? For over 4 centuries, historians, archaeologists, and researchers have tried to find the answer to the question that John White asked himself back in August 1590. Where did the 117 colonists disappear to? At first glance, it seems that the answer should have been found long ago. But the history of Roanoke turned out to be much more complex. Almost all documents were lost. There were no witnesses left. And nature, over hundreds of years, has almost completely changed the shore where the settlement once stood. That is why today there are several main versions. Let us examine each of them. Theory 1. They moved to the CROATOANs. This version is considered the most likely. And the main piece of evidence is the word CROATOAN. The CROATOANs were one of the local tribes that lived on an island located approximately 80 kilometers south of Roanoke. Unlike some other tribes, they maintained friendly relations with the English. Their representative was Manteo, whom we already know. He helped the colonists from the very first days. Translated, explained local customs, tried to prevent conflicts. If the colonists decided to leave Roanoke voluntarily, CROATOAN seemed like the safest place. Moreover, they left the inscription exactly as they had agreed with John White, without a cross. This means that the decision was most likely voluntary. There is another interesting fact. Many years later, English settlers reported seeing people with European facial features among some members of local tribes. Some had lighter eyes. Others had unusually light hair. Of course, this is not direct proof. But it is precisely such testimonies that make many historians take this theory seriously. Theory 2. They moved inland. There is another interesting version. Perhaps the inscription CROATOAN was only the first clue. Some of the colonists could have set off further, deep into the continent. There was more fertile land there, better places for hunting, less danger from ocean storms. Some archaeological finds indeed hint that small groups of English could have lived far from the original colony. In the territory of modern North Carolina, archaeologists have found English pottery, metal objects, and tools dating back to the late 16th century. This does not prove that all the colonists settled there, but it shows that at least some of them could have traveled much further than previously thought. Theory 3. Famine. When John White left the colony, the supplies were only enough for a short time. The colonists expected him to return by the following spring. Instead, they waited for almost 3 years. Even if the first harvest was successful, it might not have been enough. Drought, flood, crop failure. Any natural disaster could have pushed the colony to the brink of survival. History knows many cases where even well-prepared settlements could not withstand several difficult seasons in a row. That is why famine could well have forced people to leave Roanoke and seek help from neighboring tribes. Theory 4. Attack. For many years, this particular version was the most popular. After the death of the leader Wingina, many tribes perceived the English as enemies. Perhaps they decided to take revenge. Some oral traditions, recorded much later, mention possible clashes between the colonists and local peoples. However, a serious problem arises here. No traces of a major battle were found at the colony site. There were no mass graves. There were no remains of fortifications destroyed in battle. There was not even a significant amount of weapons. If a large-scale massacre had occurred, archaeologists would most likely have found at least some of this evidence. That is why today this version is considered less convincing. Theory 5. The Spanish. It is worth remembering that at the end of the 16th century, England and Spain were at war. Spanish ships regularly patrolled the coast of America. Some historians suggested that the colony could have been found by Spanish soldiers. For Spain, the appearance of an English settlement was a serious threat. However, the archives preserved in Spain do not contain convincing evidence of such an operation. If the Spanish had really destroyed the colony, they would most likely have reported it to their king. But such documents have not been found yet. Theory 6. Epidemic. Another possible reason is disease. At the end of the 16th century, even a common infection could become fatal. The colonists lived in difficult conditions. They were malnourished. They worked almost without rest. Any epidemic could have spread quickly among a small community. However, this theory also has a weak point. If most of the people had died on the island, archaeologists should have found at least some of the burials. And there are almost none. New discoveries of the 21st century. Recent decades have given researchers new hope. Archaeologists are using technologies that John White could not even dream of. Laser terrain scanning, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, soil chemical analysis. One of the most interesting discoveries was the old map by John White. While examining it, scientists discovered a hidden symbol that had long remained invisible under a paper patch. It may mark a small fort located significantly further west of Roanoke. It was in that area that several English artifacts from the late 16th century were later found. This could mean that at least some of the colonists actually moved to another location. But even these discoveries do not yet provide a definitive answer. So what really happened? If you carefully compare all the facts, you can draw a cautious conclusion. Most likely, the colonists did not disappear overnight. They did not become victims of some mystical event. And, most likely, they were not completely destroyed. It seems they did what any person does when they want to survive. They left a place that could no longer feed them. Some may have moved to the CROATOANs. Others may have headed further inland. Over time, they could have mixed with local peoples, lost the English language, and gradually become part of the New World. If this is true, then the lost colony was never completely lost. It simply ceased to be English. And this thought seems most convincing to many researchers today. But until irrefutable evidence is found, the mystery of Roanoke will remain open. And perhaps that is what makes it so fascinating even after 400 years. The legacy of Roanoke. The story of the lost colony of Roanoke is not just a story about the disappearance of 117 people. It is a story about courage, about hope, about risk, and about how unpredictable history can be. When we remember the first colonists, it is easy to imagine them only as names in old documents. But each of them was a living person. Someone left their parents in England. Someone, their friends. Someone sold all their property to start life anew. They set off across the ocean not for adventure. They dreamed of the future, of their own home, of land that would belong to their children. They did not know they would become part of one of the greatest mysteries in history. And yet, even if the colony disappeared, its story did not end. Only 20 years passed. In 1607, the English founded Jamestown, the first permanent English colony in North America. Its settlers had already accounted for many of Roanoke's mistakes. They arrived with larger supplies, organized defense better, gradually established supply lines across the Atlantic. Yet even Jamestown barely survived. The first years of the colony were so difficult that historians called this period the starving time. People died from exhaustion, disease, and lack of food. And this reminds us once again how difficult the life of the first settlers was. That is why Roanoke cannot be considered just a failed attempt at colonization. It became a lesson that helped England understand that creating a new country requires much more than a few ships and bold plans. Supplies were needed, constant connection with the homeland, cooperation with local peoples, and, most importantly, patience. It was thanks to these conclusions that England was eventually able to establish itself in North America. Over the centuries, small colonies would turn into large cities. Eventually, 13 British colonies would appear, and later still, they would become the foundation of a new state, the United States of America. In a sense, the story of Roanoke became the first chapter of this great history, even if it ended tragically. But something else is most striking. Despite hundreds of expeditions, thousands of hours of archaeological research, and the development of modern science, we still cannot say with absolute certainty what happened to the 117 colonists. Perhaps they found shelter among the CROATOANs. Perhaps they headed inland. Perhaps their descendants lived alongside indigenous peoples for a long time, never suspecting that one day the whole world would be looking for traces of their ancestors. Sometimes history does not leave us with final answers. It leaves only fragments. A few records, an old map, a few found artifacts, one word carved into a tree. CROATOAN. Sometimes it is the lack of an answer that makes a story immortal. That is why we still return to Roanoke. Not because we love riddles, but because they remind us, even in a world where almost every corner of the earth is mapped, there are still stories that have not revealed their secrets. Perhaps one day archaeologists will find a settlement that no one knew about. Perhaps new technologies will help uncover evidence hidden under layers of soil for over 4 centuries. And perhaps the answer will remain lost forever. And if that is the case, then the lost colony of Roanoke will forever remain more than just a historical mystery. It will become a symbol of human courage, a symbol of the desire to explore the unknown, and a reminder that great discoveries almost always begin with great risk. Thank you for taking this journey through time with me. If you like documentaries about true historical mysteries, don't forget to support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel. Many more incredible stories await us ahead, from lost civilizations and great battles to people who forever changed the course of world history. See you next time.